Here on The Colour of Country Life, good to be catching up again with the Chair of Grain Growers Limited, Brett Hosking. How are you, Brett?
Yeah, going well, thanks, Ricky.
And how's the season going so far for you? Is it too wet, or are you able to get things done out there at Quambatook?
We're just about ideal at the moment. Crops are all in the ground, all up out of the ground actually, and I did sneak out on Saturday to spray a canola crop and left quite a few wheel marks in it because it was a bit too wet, and I probably shouldn't have done it, but it's a sign that things are tracking pretty well too.
Yeah, it's hard to know exactly how the soil is in every paddock, I guess, until you get out there.
Yeah, I kind of knew what I was headed for, but anyhow, we do these things.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I guess we're looking at a few things. There's the figures that came out from ABARES recently indicating that there's a really good export value for our growers, but there's some headwinds as well. And I guess, credit where it's due, Grain Growers was saying pretty early in the piece, late last year or even earlier than that, about input costs and the challenges they were going to bring for farmers. First of all, just how are things looking, I guess, from your point of view from grain growers in terms of what's planted in the ground, not just in your own paddock, but across the country?
Yeah, across the country we're looking not too bad. I think large parts of South Australia, they were a little dry and they've had rain in recent weeks, which is exciting. WA, for the most part, is tracking okay, but there are a few growers starting to say we'd love to see a rain. You go up northern New South Wales, southern Queensland, and they're telling us the exact opposite. They're saying, can the rain just stop for a bit? We want to get this crop in the ground. So one of the challenges maybe is that as their winter cropping window starts to close and it's still too wet to access paddocks, they may start to shift a little bit more towards summer cropping. But they're blessed that those guys have the opportunity to make that decision as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess when we're looking at the farmgate value, whenever those figures are mentioned, we're always sort of cautious to go, well, yeah, part of that seems to be because of, I guess, where the export market stands in terms of the challenges of getting product out of Ukraine, for instance, and might be sort of inflating things in terms of what is actually coming out of Australia.
Yeah, look, geopolitical is almost the word of 2022. With what we're seeing in Russia and Ukraine, and then we're seeing the way other countries are reacting to that. We've seen Indonesia ban exports of palm oil. We've seen India suffer a real heat wave, and that's impacted their crops, and they've banned wheat exports. We've seen, a whole lot of other challenges with, grain. There's apparently 20 million tonnes of wheat sitting in the Ukraine right now that just cannot be moved out of the country because, you're not going to sail a ship into a harbour that's filled with sea mines and that sort of thing. So there's all these geopolitical challenges which are inflating the price of grain, which is good for growers. I'm not sure our growers are seeing the full benefit of that. And that's almost another story about how efficient our markets are here in Australia and how efficient our supply chain is. But our growers are seeing some of that reward, and that's good as well.
Yeah, and I guess we're always cautious to say we don't want to, be happy about profiting from other people's misery, but also on the climate front in the Northern Hemisphere, a lot of the seasons, the outlook there is that things aren't going to be so great on the cropping front for them, whereas we've almost got, like you say, in New South Wales in the north, more rain than we need.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, it is the nature of farming. I mean, 99% of our grain produced in Australia is rain-fed or relies very heavily on what the season provides, and which is why we go to church on Sunday and pray for a good season. There is no doubt that our turn will come, but let's enjoy it while we do have that opportunity. And certainly all of these geopolitical situations, we don't wish them on anyone, and if there was a way we could stop it, we'd do it overnight. But the reality is it is happening, and the world needs to be fed, and there's a lot of countries that are struggling with food at the moment. Australia can be part of that solution, and whilst we can't necessarily impact the economics of what they'll have to pay for that food, we can make sure that the food they get from Australia is clean, safe, nutritious and produced in a really sustainable way, and that's really important, I think, as well.
Yeah, that's something we've been talking about as well, as it's not just about farmers making a reasonable buck after some difficult years during drought, but there's a humanitarian angle to it as well in terms of feeding a world where some countries, I mean Sri Lanka's had a number of things that they've started to run out of amongst this sort of tight market where it's hard to get the product at a price you can afford.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a real challenge, and it does break your heart. And I grew up sort of through the 80s, and you'd see those World Vision ads, and you sort of feel like maybe we'd moved on from that a little bit. Maybe we got a bit better at making sure some of the poorest in the world are fed, but I'm not so certain we have at times. So it is a challenge. It's a global challenge that we've all got to think about and take responsibility for.
You mentioned that, with the good year, relatively speaking, that we're having, are there some structural changes that governments at all levels need to make in terms of like those efficiencies in the supply chain, being able to get things out of the East Coast a bit quicker, or even just structurally to make sure, for instance, we've got preparation for the next inevitable drought cycle?
Yeah, so what I often say is I feel like we need supply chains and markets that are as efficient and as nimble as the growers themselves that produce the grain are, because what we see is that the growers are at the forefront of we're a country of droughts and flooding rains. We have our boom years, we have our really tough years, and production fluctuates, but growers have built into their businesses the ability to flex around those different cycles in our crop production. I'm not certain our supply chain and our markets have done the same thing. They haven't built that surge capacity when we've got a lot of grain in the country like we do at the moment to be able to execute it really quickly, get it to port, get it to market, get it to our customers overseas that need it in a really timely fashion. And so I think there's a lot of work. There's some investment. There's also some strategic thinking that needs to go into that. And also our markets. We need to make sure our markets truly reflect the value that's being created around the globe and reflect the quality of the grain that's being produced here in Australia by our growers, and also are nimble enough to ensure that when a country needs grain, our markets are nimble enough to support that execution as well. We've got a bit of work to do there. It's one of the things we called for in the election campaign was a ACCC market study. We still think that's really important because the ACCC have got a role in making sure our markets work efficiently and work for the benefit of our growers, but also our customers at the end as well.
Well, maybe with the big debate going on about energy at the moment, we'll get to input costs in a minute. Maybe we need to be talking about a food grid and a water grid. When you talk about the energy grid, people seem to understand there's a whole lot of money being spent on re-engineering that. Maybe we need to re-engineer the food grid.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, you don't have to look too hard at our supply chain for a logical person to be able to find ways to improve it. And so I feel like we just need to apply some of that logic and create some of those fixes.
Now, just a couple of things locally for you. You mentioned the supply chain. What about this Murray Basin rail debate? That's not far from yourself. Is that something that would make a major impact in northern and western Victoria?
Yeah, absolutely. It's got to happen. It was a commitment by the Victorian government, and I don't know why they haven't honoured that commitment. To be honest, we know it will improve efficiency. We know it will improve safety. And we also know as we've just had an election that's been dictated by the Australian public wanting to be more emissions friendly and more, reduce our emissions, reduce our impact on the climate, and shifting grain from road to rail is one of the most obvious ways that we can do that. So why we aren't investing right across the country in projects like that is beyond me. I feel like we need to use those measures that we know are more efficient, and those measures that we know will also be able to flex as we get new technology, whether it be electric powered trains or something like that in the future, or hydrogen powered trains, and that are more environmentally efficient. That's where that sort of technology will start, is on our rail network. So why are we not investing in them now so that we're ready for the future? It's beyond me.
Now, also in your own patch, we were speaking with Rabobank analyst Dennis Vosnezensky. He said his clients were saying that they were going to plant an increased 10% of area in Victoria, and then that's what ABARES told us earlier in the week as well, is that they also are seeing that increased level of planting. Positive news for Victorian growers, but still not necessarily going to mean a massive harvest.
Yeah, look, we're still very weather dependent, and we've been so blessed at this stage to have, I think all parts of Victoria have had good rain now. Crops for the most part up and out of the ground. As I've travelled around, I've seen those green rows come up, which is exciting, and even there's a little bit of fertiliser and nutrition going out at the moment, along with some herbicides. So growers are doing what they can to make sure we have a good season. But you know what, it's still very early days, and we'll just hope and pray that the season continues the way it started.
Now, we are seeing statistically across from ABARES and others saying that there's a big increase in the plantings of canola, and when we get to input costs, like you just mentioned, that's going to potentially mean a lot more urea is going to be needed. Have we got enough fertiliser to go around? Is that going to be something that, I guess, nobbles the value in terms of farmgate, in terms of the input cost?
Yeah, our growers have been fairly proactive, I know, and got out and ordered a bit of urea and made sure they've got the nutrition they need or that they're able to afford. And that's, I think, one of the challenges and perhaps what will put a cap on production this year is, regardless of how good the season performs, we will, with the price of nitrogen being more than double what it was last year, what we'll see is that point of diminishing return come a whole lot earlier. So that benefit from adding an extra unit of nitrogen and the cost of doing so, the cost will be a bit higher. So that benefit, I guess in value terms, reduces a little bit, and the risk increases quite significantly for the grower in what they've outlaid and invested in the crop. So I think unfortunately, it's going to be one of the negative outcomes is we're going to see growers perhaps not realise the full potential of the crop that they could produce this season, which is a little bit unfortunate when we do talk about people starving around the world as well.
Yeah, and also one of those other input costs that also spins out of that conflict in the Ukraine in particular is fuel prices. In RMA indicates diesel prices, at least in Sydney, on average up 49% on the same time last year. That's another one that's going to not only cut in, I guess, to when it comes to farmers' operating costs, but on the freight side as well without a rebate for freight.
Yeah, absolutely. It's hurting everyone, the fuel price, but it's hurting rural communities so much more because, you know what, we don't have the opportunity to jump on a tram or a bus to get to a doctor's appointment, and often some of the poorest in our communities are the ones worst hit when they do have to access education, medical services, even just supermarkets and that, and the cost of doing so has increased so significantly. So it is a massive challenge, the energy conversation at the moment, and the fuel conversation, and we do need to address it and maybe help people where we can.
Well, also, I guess another part of the conversation we're picking up is this incredible increase on land prices. A lot of interest. People are seeing farms, for instance, in Victoria and even in Tasmania, great interest in buying those up. But that spikes the land price and potentially increases your council rate significantly as well. So is that a looming input cost problem as well?
Yeah, look, we're working very closely with local governments to ensure that rate increases aren't significant. In Victoria, we have caps on the amount they're allowed to increase those rates. And I know the Victorian Farmers Federation is monitoring that really closely to make sure councils don't go above those caps. But yeah, it is a big challenge, and the Reserve Bank are doing what they can to curb the increase in land prices at the moment. But it's kind of a good story too, because it means people believe in agriculture at the moment. People are excited about agriculture and they want to invest. And that's a good story as well. We want an industry. We have an industry that's full of opportunity at the moment, and it would be great if governments could realise that opportunity and get behind our farmers and support them to grow their businesses, to grow their production, and continue to contribute to the Australian economy.
That's a fantastic note to finish on, Brett Hosking. We are excited about the optimism in farming, and there's always challenges. It was just farmers are very good at tackling them themselves. So thanks very much, Brett, for joining us today from Grain Growers Limited.
Always a pleasure. Thanks for having us, Rick.